Have you ever wished you could travel all over the world and meet masterful people in the field of education? People you may not have known and the stories you've never heard. Cup of Capacity is just that. I wanted to introduce you to masterful people in education. Some are people I have known, and some I have heard about. They were chosen for their unique impact on education and to share the insights they've learned along the way. In a digital setting, each monthly episode features an in-depth conversation with a masterful leader as they explore their journey and answer a series of questions. Grab a refreshment and let's enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cup of Capacity. We're so excited that you're with us here today, and I am super thrilled to introduce you to my guest today. We have with us Dr. Kylene Beers, and I was thinking of this week and trying to remember when she first came into my life. I've known Kylene for a while, and funny enough, we worked in the same school district, not at the same time or the same place, but we have that in common. She has been a teacher. She is an author. She has been a professor, a researcher. She also was the president of the National Council of Teachers of English, NCTE, that we mostly say. She works as a consultant, and she works alongside teachers, researchers, and other amazing people who are always looking at how to improve the literacy lives of all of our children. And she does a lot of her work with a friend of ours, Bob Probst. And I'm super excited to have her with us today. So hi, Kylene, good to have you with us.
Good morning. It is great to be here with you.
Thank you. So I am really excited to hear, because I don't know, and those are really my favorite interviews, is when I don't know all the information. I know Oprah says she never prepared or listened ahead of time because she wanted to just be like the audience. Tell us about your journey through education.
Sure. And, it's such an interesting question. So thank you for asking that. I'm not sure that I've ever stepped back and said to myself, what's the whole journey? I think, like many people, I've looked at points along the way and said, wow, that point was important. Those moments that really change the direction of your life. But then to tie all those moments together so that you see the whole path is much easier done when you're looking back than when you're actually on the journey. So thank you for asking me to reflect on that. When I did start thinking about it, I had to realize two things. First, I never intended to be a teacher. And second, that journey of I'll never be a teacher probably started when I was in high school, and I had my first job, after school job, and on Saturdays, and that was to be a travel agent. And I lived in a real small town, Sulphur Springs, Texas, up in East Texas, and we had one travel agency. And at that time, travel agents were critical because there was no internet. There was no, just pick up the phone actually and even call the airline. They weren't expecting that. You went to a travel agent. And when you were working on people's trips at that point, you had this huge book. It was called the Official Airline Guide, and it got reprinted weekly. So you want to talk about a tremendous waste of paper. Yeah. But it would list every airline going to every city from every place you could think of. And so people would come in, and sometimes they needed to take a business trip to Chicago or a family vacation to Los Angeles, or even something tragic like a funeral, and they needed to get over to New Orleans. And my job was to take all of those needs. What time do you want to go? When do you want to return? How much money do you want to spend? There was no airline loyalty. No one was worried about that. And I loved it. I loved that orchestration of bringing it all together. So at the same time that I'm thinking about, this was a junior or senior year experience, I guess. and I was beginning to think about where to go to study for college, I knew I wasn't going to look at being a teacher. My mom was a teacher. I had nothing against teachers. I loved school, but that wasn't on the list. But at the same time, I was developing skills that have served me well all the way through my life. So I head off to the University of Texas. I am an English major and a psychology major, and my goal was probably to become a psychiatrist working with kids on the spectrum. And so I had a job at the Austin State Hospital, and that was exactly what I was doing all throughout my college years. And loved that, but decided I probably wasn't a special enough person to do that for a lifetime, because it was filled with a tremendous amount of pain and worry and suffering, because there was so much we didn't know then. So I decided that I would follow in my dad's footsteps and become an attorney. And I was already dating my husband, Brad, who was well on his way at law school of being an attorney. So we were going to be two families of being an attorney. But I decided for a while, one of us needed to have a real job, like a job. And so I went around from department to department at the University of Texas and said, here's all these hours in psychology and in English. What could they actually let me become? Because when I would look in the newspaper, I never saw an ad that said English major required. And there was no LinkedIn, there wasn't an Indeed.com. There was just the newspaper and whatever went up in your university. And someone said, why don't you go try education? And I said, some dean said that. And I said, no, I do not want to be a teacher. But that was something that would use all my hours, and it would give me a job pretty much right away. And I walked in and I took the classes and I met incredible professors. I got to study under Edmund Farrell, who is Mr. English Education. I got to study under James Canavy, Maxine Hairston. I just had all of these fabulous English educators put in front of me, and I didn't even realize it, because when you're an undergraduate, you don't know anything. And so I was still just plodding along, and I went off and did student teaching. And from the first day of student teaching, which was the mind-blowing, life-transforming spelling test that I gave. So, we all know how to do that. Take out your sheet of paper, number 1 to 20, along the left-hand red margin, and then you say the word, you repeat the word, you use it in a sentence, you say the word. I did it beautifully because I had gone through 12 years of those. And at the end of that lesson, I thought, I can be a teacher, because I kind of thought that's what it was. It was about instructions and not instruction. And learned so much that year. I was at Murchison Junior High, where the year before Texas had experienced its first school shooting. And it was at Murchison Junior High, which is a school that is open in the middle. All the classrooms come out to a common hallway that go around a courtyard, 2 levels high. And that year I saw trauma in children for the first time, because anytime someone would bang a locker and it would reverberate in that concrete hall that was open, children would literally put their heads under a desk. They would cry. They were still in trauma. And so all of that work I had done with children when I was studying psychology and I was working at the Austin State Hospital began to be important. And then when Dr. Farrell, who is my English supervisor from the University of Texas, said to me one time, you know, the most important thing you can do, and I still follow this in everything I do, in developing a lesson plan is to focus on the transitions. You know, you may need to do 3 things during a school class period, but if children don't understand why you're moving from point A to point B and B to C, then it's just 3 segmented tasks. And suddenly all of that joy of figuring out how to get people to an airport on time, make sure once they got to the airport, they got to the hotel seamlessly. Once they were at the hotel, I remember this one family, they were the wealthy family in our town. They were going to Disneyland. And so then how do I get them their tickets and then get them back? It was all the transitions. It wasn't sitting on the airplane that was important. It was getting to the airplane and then the airplane to the hotel. And that part of me that loves to, I think, tell a story, as we were talking earlier, and you said you love story. I think I've always looked at any book I've written or any lesson I've taught as a story. And that came from Dr. Farrell, have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so my journey began with me saying, I'm not going to do this. And then it quickly moved to becoming a 7th grade teacher with one of the most influential people in my professional life. And that was my assistant principal. And later she became my principal, Ann Black. She was at Alief Middle School. And then when she opened Holland Middle School in the Alief School District, she asked me to go over and be her language arts coordinator. And she was the one who said to me, you will be a good teacher, but you don't know anything yet. And Alief, and I had to recognize she was really right. And Alief paid for my master's degree. She said, we want you to get a master's. And, you know, a master's degree was so not in the budget Brad and I had. It was, that was an extra amount of money that was nowhere with what we could afford. So Alief stepping in and saying, we will pay for this, meant everything. She also had me giving a presentation to the National Middle School Association, as it was called back then, my first year of teaching. So my first conference presentation was to a national, everything nationally from the very beginning. And what Ann wanted me talking about was what it was like to be a novice teacher. And by asking me to do that, she was helping me develop a skill I think we all need, which is to be reflective of our own teaching. Otherwise, I think it becomes very simple to just teach for the day and then say, it was a good day, because let's be honest, early on, it was a good day meant kids were doing what I asked them to do. Right. Or it was a bad day, which meant they weren't doing what I asked them to do. I learned far more from the bad days because they weren't doing what I would ask them to do. Now that I look back, because it was either meaningless to them or it was way outside their, you know, at the time, I didn't know this term, but outside of their zone of proximal development, or it was within the zone, but they didn't give a damn. I mean, for some reason, I thought it was really important to teach direct and indirect objects my first year of teaching to 7th graders. Wow. Yeah, I've come a long way, but that wasn't going to be hard to do because, you know, the bar was real low for me to become better. But it was her saying, talk about being a novice teacher. And it was Ed Farrell saying, hold on to those transitions. And it was me remembering that I loved the planning that allowed me for about the first 3 or 4 years of my teaching to write out word by word every lesson plan. Now, that didn't mean, in a way it was a script, but it was my script. But mostly it meant I was focusing intently on how I was trying to move the lesson along. And then, of course, we all know a lesson plan pretty much dissolves in about the first 10 minutes of class because a student brings up something that isn't in your lesson plan. And there's just no way, if you're going to be a responsive teacher, that you can say, oh, that's really interesting, but I'm now on paragraph 5.
Right.
So I would learn as I would go back and review and write notes that I was so over planning. And I began to learn the lesson of less is more. And of course, so much of that came out in my first book, When Kids Can't Read, What Teachers Can Do, because I found when we were moving houses, those early year journals that I had kept. And that gave me all my stories about George, the kid that I write letters to in that book. But it also gave me the memories of how I was, without even realizing it, honing my craft.
Yeah.
A master's led to a PhD. That led to me loving to work with people becoming teachers. So I eventually did leave public school day-to-day teaching, which I think is probably one of the most important jobs in our nation, to teach at the University of Houston to help people become teachers. And I desperately loved that job. That led to an appointment at Yale University, where I got to work in the medical school with Dr. Comer's school development program. And that was really a immersive experience in desperately low socioeconomic status schools that were achieving at extremely high levels because of Dr. Comer's philosophy in educating the entire child and educating the entire faculty. So his point was, if one teacher is really good in a school building, then every parent who doesn't have that one teacher has a right to sue that school district. So you better improve every teacher's understanding of content, but also understanding of the child. And so that's why his program was called the Child Development Program. And, you know, I got to work there for several years, flew back and forth from Houston. We never moved. Houston was always our home. You know, once you have a church family and you have a community in which you work, and my husband's career was settled and our kids were in school, that's your home. And right. So I would just get on a plane and fly up to Yale, stay there for the week, come back on the weekend, but I only had to do that 1 week out of a month. Okay. So I missed some stuff with my kids, but Brad got to be the true parent in charge. And I think as a result of that, both of our kids have a really deep relationship with both of us, though they turn to each of us for different reasons. Yeah. And then somewhere along my journey, I ran into this guy in person that I had met through English Journal, and that was Dr. Robert Probst. I had known Bob through the 80s and 90s via all of his articles in English Journal, the secondary journal of NCTE. I had read so many of Bob's articles, and of course his iconic book called Response and Analysis. I had read so much of what this man had written, I was quite sure he was dead. And I think that's because I thought if anyone has written that much, it's either killed them or you're really old and you died. And that was fine because, you know, we all read dead white authors. And so I was stunned when at a NCTE meeting, as I was talking with Judy Wallace, and I know she's also been on your program, I said to her, "Who's that?" as Bob walked by, because we were looking at Gary Paulson when he walked by, and Walter Dean Myers when he walked by, and Sandra Cisneros, she was there that year and she walked by. And then Bob walked by and I said, "Who's that?" And she told me, and I said, no, he's dead. But eventually I got up the courage to go and talk with Bob. And we discovered that we were both intensely committed to the idea of literacy as power. And in this country, more often literacy has been about the suppression of power. And this was back in 1990. And we realized we brought different skill sets to that same conversation. And so we began working together. And that has been a collaboration that now has gone on firmly since about 1995. So we're looking at a very long collaboration, I feel like, with one of the greatest minds in literacy education, and that's Bob Probst. He understands more about how reading gives us the opportunity to change ourselves. It doesn't change us, because that then puts all of the power in the text. But by understanding and thinking about and talking about that text, we hold within ourselves the opportunity to change ourselves. And then writing with clarity and with conviction and with voice gives us the chance to make those changes known to others, make our thoughts known to others. And every time along my journey that I have been confused or stumped or need to talk through something, the first person I will turn to is Bob, because he has already thought about it. And that collaboration has continued. We made a commitment to ourselves and to the nation of teachers that if we were going to write books for teachers and have our handprint on textbooks that are used in literacy textbooks used in elementary school and middle and high school, then the first thing we would always be doing is teaching in classrooms. Part of our journey, both of our journeys, but my journey, his journey individually, is a deep, deep belief that people who don't teach should stop talking about how to teach. Just get the hell out of the way. And people who do teach have a responsibility to be reflective in that teaching, to grow from that teaching, and when they are comfortable, share that knowledge with others. So the day Bob and I stop going into classrooms and working with kids will be the day that we both say, okay, it's time for us to do a different kind of work. And that has served us well up until March 9th of 2020, when we were in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, working with kids and teachers up there. We were going to be following Monday in Long Island, working with teachers and students there. And of course, what happened on March 10 shut down because of COVID. And we both got on airplanes and went back to our homes. Mine's here in Texas, his is in Florida. And we have, like the rest of the world, pivoted and been into classrooms and into teacher meetings via the internet. And we are oh so grateful for living in a time of technology that allows us to have connections when otherwise we would have all felt rudderless this year. Is in spite of how hard the year's been, we've all still been able to connect with someone via a screen. And that's not as good or as powerful as connecting with kids in a classroom. But when it's the only thing we were offered, we took it.
Yeah.
So my journey has been about some touchstone people, some touchstone lessons, and a family that has every step of the way supported me and said, go try it. Because as I tell my kids and the students I teach, there is a 100% certainty that you will fail if you do not try.
Yes.
And so in my family and in my life, teaching has been about pushing myself to try what I didn't think I wanted to do or could do. And when I fail, I just look at that as a learning experience. And when I succeed, I look at that as simply a step toward the next thing I need to try.
I love that. And I want to go back to a couple of things. When you were sharing about your early days in Alief, and Anne saying you don't know anything, and then she pushed you to present. I was really reflecting on that quite a bit, because Alief is the district that I also started my teaching career in. And I know that districts change over time, just like a person, your personality and life. But at that time, I had several people who were, I want to say brutally honest, but they weren't brutal. They were, first of all, they were knowledgeable. They were speaking from a place of knowing. And they gave me feedback that was very honest.
Right.
And but then they also were there to support you and push you, because they expected the best for the children. The community of Alief has a lot of poverty and a lot of high needs, a lot of violence. And so that's something that we share in common. And so many times you and I work with a lot of educators, and sometimes they will receive feedback from somebody who maybe has not had experience in what they're teaching. And so then the feedback is not always accurate or aligned. And then they don't always have the support. If somebody says you're too short, you're too short, you're too short, how to get taller. So do you want to talk a little bit more about the power of that, giving very targeted, specific feedback from somebody who has the knowledge, and then backed up by, that same person or someone else who can then support you and grow you and cheer you and push you?
I think that that's something that we miss in many school districts right now. And I would, if I had to say, well, what caused the shift from the kind of feedback and support I was receiving to the kind of feedback and support that many teachers, not by no stretch of the imagination do either of us mean all, but many teachers don't get that emotional support, that cognitive support, and certainly not the financial support that I received. And I think the difference is the standardized test. When I was first starting my teaching, and for several years, the standardized test was the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, the ITBS. Right. And zero preparation for it. You just knew that on these 3 days, you loved as a teacher the ITBS because it meant there was no teaching and no homework. It was like a vacation time, and kids didn't worry about it. Therefore, I'm not sure they tried their hardest. And sometime the next year, the ITBS report came home, came to you, and you sent it home, and that was the end of it. Therefore, when I met with either Charlie Cothran, who was the principal, and I'd like to remember Mr. Cothran for a moment because he recently did pass. And the write-up about Mr. Cothran in the newspaper was perfect because it captured his commitment to children. And I think that that's what he spread to Ann Black, who was his assistant principal. And I think that's what she spread to Mary Riedel, who became her assistant principal, and Mary's now a principal or a superintendent up in Missouri. Those people, the administrators, had a commitment to improving teachers by helping them understand learning and teaching, and not by helping them understand what a test score meant about a kid. They were all of those people I got to work with. Pat Farley over in central administration, Karen Kirkendall over in central administration, all of those people really were focused on how do you help whatever your subject area is, a child see himself, herself as a reader or as a writer. And along with that, what do we need to be doing about your class management to help all kids have the safe space in which to learn and in which to fail? Failing was not seen as the entree to being held back, needing to go to summer school. It was seen as an entree to a conversation about what do we all need to be doing better for this kid. And I don't think I ever heard the term this kid as much as I heard the first 5 years in the rest of my life. It was always about this kid. So, I feel that I lucked in to, because it had nothing to do with me, I lucked into a time in teaching in which we were not overburdened by standardized tests, and a district that was large enough that it had some financial, extra finances to help either get different materials or to provide, master's programs for teachers. It was large enough to have that, but it was small enough that the administrators and your co-teachers, Terry Lassane was there with me, Dr. Terry Lassane. She was down 2 doors from me and was the far more experienced teacher because she had taught 1 year longer than I had. So she was the person I would go to first. So the collegiality among the faculty, especially between the more experienced faculty and the novice faculty, was critical. You didn't have to get matched with a mentor teacher. There was no, that wasn't an issue. No one had to worry about, are you the mentor or the mentee? Everyone had a single goal, and that goal was to help every child become the best that kid could be. And so we met in teams, we taught in teams, and we learned as teachers in teams how to help specific children. I think we have lost that as we've moved to letting the first part of the conversation be about a test score and not about a child.
Yeah, I think that in some ways you guys were the original PLC, the intention behind the idea of a PLC. And I think that you travel far more than I do. But I do believe that in those districts where you see a lot of success, there are challenges in every district. Um, uh, and some of them come from those risk factors that we know exist. And so I do believe what I see in those districts that are most successful, it's not about the size of the districts. It's not about any other things other than exactly what you just described. The focus on it all comes from usually the leader, the superintendent who does talk and say, we're going to focus on growing every single child, and they authentically mean that. And they may not have the map for every single thing that's going to happen or the transitions, but they know that they have the confidence to say that's what we're going to focus on. And as a result, our scores are going to reflect, because if children are moving and we're focusing, then it's going to be reflective. I think when people are solely focused on test scores, and that becomes, it's like sometimes like a crazy addiction, and people can't stop and like back up and reflect enough to realize it's overwhelming when you look at the numbers. If you're saying 60% of all children are reading far below grade level, you're like, what do I do with that? But that there's an old story about a man throwing all these starfish into the ocean, and somebody said, why are you doing that? My friend Natalie shares that all the time. She's like, it made a difference for that one. It made a difference for that one. And you don't realize that you are building your capacity. You're building your craft, because it is the art and the science of teaching. By working with that one child or those group of children who have similar needs, you're developing your skills. And you and I have lived long enough that when I came on the scene, small group instruction was a new concept. Like, that was a revolutionary idea in Alief. And once you get a taste of that, you and I both, I've worked with very young children all the way to high school children. In secondary, sometimes that can be a new concept. But once you get a taste of being knee to knee, eye to eye with children, whether you're standing or sitting or whatever, it's such a good feeling. And that concept of like, gosh, I'm really seeing you. I'm really getting to know you. I can put my finger on where your strengths are, what makes you laugh, what you're interested in. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree with you.
As I was starting in the Alief school district, we were one of the first districts when children from Vietnam who were escaping and coming to America came to the Alief school district. So we really had one school year where we had no children who were from Vietnam, and the next school year, starting in about October, probably our school went up to about 20% of our student body were children from Vietnam. And 3 of those children were put into my classroom or into one of my classes. And I had no understanding of how to teach a child who had come from another land. And my biggest mistake is I thought the issue was language. And so I did the 2 things I knew to do. I talked English louder and slower. And I will tell you that if anyone's making a list of strategies to try, you can go ahead and take that one and put it on the doesn't work list. But my problem was I thought the issue was language. And that wasn't it. On day 2, I will never forget one of the young boys, these were 7th graders, when we walked into the cafeteria, and this was when you would line kids up and walk them to the cafeteria. And I was walking beside him, and think about an American middle school cafeteria. There are trays clanging, metal forks and spoons clanging, kids throwing milk cartons into trash cans, and this hub of noise. He had never experienced that.
Wow.
And he took off running down the hall screaming. Luckily, what kicked in for me was go back on my journey to my work in the Austin State Hospital. This child did not have a a being on the spectrum difference. What this child had was a being in a new culture difference.
Right.
And no one had in any way tried to ease him into it.
Right.
And that's when I began the term cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity did not exist. We were very much a nation of extreme white privilege, and not just white privilege, but North American white privilege in Texas, not just North American white privilege, but you're going to do it the Texas way. You know, Texas has often been its own nation unto itself.
Right.
And that really, that moment with that child, and then later a person that the district brought in who was fluent in Vietnamese explained to me that these children who would not look at me in the eye, they always looked down, explained to me that that was a tremendous sign of respect. That in Vietnam, a child would never be so bold as to look at a teacher who was one of the most respected people in the community straight in the eye.
Right.
It wasn't the language that was my problem in helping children. It was my lack of understanding of children and of children from different cultures. And I think, you know, for the last part of my journey, what I'm really doing, and I'm excited to be doing, is dismantling my white privilege and trying to understand the life I've lived and the life I want to live. And, you know, it's Maya Angelou, once you know better, do better. And I'm constantly learning how to know better. I'm not just waiting for it to come to me. I'm actively seeking it out. And so I hope the last part of my journey in education is all about doing better, because I hope to continue to learn much more.
Well, that seems like a small thread throughout your whole career, because, you know, from the very beginning, we had already mentioned, you know, Ann Bass giving you very stark and clear feedback, but, you know, pushing you and supporting you. And so when we have knowledge, when we know better, we can do better. And so that's going to apply to different things at different times in our lives, and also reflective of the society around us. One of the second things you said, I know we're getting close to the end of our interview, but yeah, I feel like I learn a lot every time. You and I could spend many days together. But one of the things that you said that is really, I'm going to be marinating on all day was, you know, when you're reading, the opportunity to change ourselves. It's not an external thing, it's an internal thing. And I think that is so true, because we've all been impacted by our life's experience and what is around us, but also that's the beauty of reading, because it can transport you to a new place. It can give you things to think about. And then when you said writing changes, you can reflect those changes to others in your writing. And so, you know, just the concept, you know, you just spoke about, you know, basically doing equity work and really looking at our own privilege, and then, you know, how we can better support others. Do you want to say a little bit about, you know, everything about that, like from outside of ourselves, but then supporting and working with others? I really, you have a vast body of work, but I worked in a district that did a very large and very expensive secondary literacy initiative. And I was fortunate to lead and be part of a team that did that work in one of the largest systems in Texas. And Notice and Note for fiction and nonfiction played a huge part in that work. And what was so delightful about it is the premise. It comes out of a place of vulnerability of kids saying, this is what I'm noticing, and making note of it. And, that it was all internal work, and it was born out of them, not just us pouring into them.
One of my ongoing concerns is that the more teachers think about providing scaffolds, and I'm all for a good scaffold, but the more we do that and the more we focus on, can we ask better questions? Can we, I guess it was the close reading initiative that reared its head about 10 years ago now, where teachers were taught, ask this kinds of questions for the first read, and this kind for the second, and this kind for the third. And the more I looked at that, the more I thought we are creating a nation of teacher-dependent kids. And while kids will eventually leave school, and you might say, well, there's not always going to be a teacher around, the reality is there will always be someone willing to step in that teacher role. It may be the car salesman, it may be the shady religious leader who's really out to just take people's money. It may be the political pundit on television who doesn't want you to think about something from a different perspective, but only one perspective. It may be the politician who's saying, here's the 5 reasons to vote for me, and forgets to mention the 5 reasons not to vote for him or her. And what some people desperately need is for a populace to know less, because it is always going to be easier to manipulate those who know less. And that's why Bob and I have always said that literacy, that the tools of literacy are reading and writing. But literacy itself is about power and privilege. And in this country, we have to recognize it's been about the suppression of power. We suppressed the Native Americans, the indigenous people, by taking away their language and saying, you will be forced. I mean, we kidnapped kids and put them in boarding schools so that they could unlearn and relearn what white people centered as the most important. We made it impossible for enslaved people to become literate, and we kept it impossible as we had different textbooks, different schools, different curriculum that our Black American children could learn. We said to the Latinx population that they could go to these schools but not be integrated with white students. And we blamed it on language, but it was about wanting to be in power. So when Bob actually we were in a high school, and he taught a stunningly brilliant lesson about a very difficult poem. And I said, I'm not teaching that poem. That I don't have any idea what this poem means. And I said, plus you're a high school teacher, you speak high school, you teach it. And, when we show up someplace to teach, we have to teach what someone hands to us.
Right.
And we have to develop a bond, at least maybe not a bond, but a familiarity with kids almost immediately. He taught a brilliant lesson. And as we left, I told him that was very smart, and he was appreciative. And I said, what's the chance that tomorrow those kids will be able to ask themselves such deep questions that they will be able to reach an understanding of the next hard poem? And he said 0, because he asked all the questions. And that's when we said there must be something beyond the title, teachers have done such a fabulous job of saying, look at the title, look at the illustrations, look at chapter titles, look at names of characters. There are many things we have taught kids to notice in a text, but still we had kids that were missing a lot. And that led us on our 2-year journey of coming up with what we end up calling signposts, because we wanted people to think of signs like when you're driving. You know, no one takes a car trip, a vacation that's a car trip, and says to the kids, let's go. We're going to drive to the Grand Canyon and we're going to see how many stop signs we see along the way. No one does that. But if you don't recognize the stop signs, you may not make it to the Grand Canyon.
Right.
You know? So what happens is eventually all of those signs when we're driving, a ball that comes out into the street, dark clouds on the horizon, a sign that says slow, new gravel ahead, all of that becomes something that we just react to, and therefore we drive a little differently. Those signposts help us get someplace safely, but they are not the point of the journey. So we studied hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of texts. And then we had teachers from across the entire state of South Carolina. We will always be indebted to South Carolina for giving us about 600 teachers who took these, what we called signposts, and took them into their classrooms. So they went everywhere from Beowulf to Beloved to Hatchet to the Watsons Go to Birmingham to Kevin Hincke's Chrysanthemum. And kids talked about what they noticed within the framework that the book Notice and Note provides.
Yeah.
And it changed conversations because it reset reading. And this will bring us full circle to the topic of this interview. It reset reading as a journey. You're on a journey and you're going from the beginning of this book to the end of this book. And what we really hope happens to you as you read this is that something happens in your heart. But there are some signposts along the way that will make sure you don't misread or that you don't miss an important thing that the author is trying to share. Because reading is a journey. It's a journey into someone else's life or into facts we don't know. And that journey is not complete until we ask ourselves, now, how will it change my journey? And
Right.
we, Bob and I, just happen to think that reading gives us the chance to make our own journeys different and hopefully better.
I love that. And I think that, I think so many ahas are kind of a cocktail of things that you kind of already knew, but really had never thought about. And internal work versus external work. And I think for so many, especially those who are in school right now, reading and writing are like these external things that are done to you. And, that work that you described really was internal work. And I love life experiences and I love really great teachers that can you can call it a cognitive shift. You can call it putting on a new pair of lenses, but really what that did was empower children or readers as a whole, people to see that as internal work, that their opinion and their thoughts had value. And also I think very few beginning readers or adolescent readers really take time to even think about the author and really consider the decisions that the author made. So I love that. And so it's a perfect segue. I want to ask you 2 fun questions. And a recurring theme in our interview today was the idea of travel.
Yes.
And so you have probably traveled to a bazillion places, but if you could get on a plane today and you could go up to 3 places, where would you travel to?
The first one is extremely simple. I would head back out to the Sonoma Wine Valley We have done a tremendous amount of hiking from vineyard to vineyard, and we have made great friends with many of the vineyard owners, and we miss them. We had a dinner party the other night where we Skyped in Eric Miller, who's the vintner for Kokomo Wines, so he could talk us through what we were enjoying. So number one, we would head right back out to Sonoma. Number two, we would go back to Italy. It's a place that we spent a month several years ago just to really experience the culture. And I am desperate to go back to Italy and take one of the cooking classes where you stay someplace for a week and you really learn how to choose the ingredients, and then you take a cooking class. So that's the second place I would go very quickly. And the third place is probably Boothbay Harbor, Maine. For years, I ran an institute called the Boothbay Literacy Retreat, and probably 10 years. And during that time, I fell in love with that area. I would go up there and think, I've lived here before. And one thing my husband and I have always wanted to do is stay a year in either Bar Harbor, Maine, or Boothbay Harbor, Maine, or maybe Portsmouth, New Hampshire, because we have so many friends there, but go be in a different climate. Even though Texas this year, we sure did get a different climate with Snowmageddon for a while, but so maybe I've done that. But we would love to just be in that part of the United States for a year to experience all 4 of the seasons and still be here within the US. I don't have a lot of travel lust to go outside of the United States. There's still so many places here I haven't seen, but I also love revisiting places I've been.
Awesome. And then my last question is about, and you may have to think for a second, it could be one thing or a couple things, like, what are you wondering about? What problems are you still trying to solve? If you could, just dedicate yourself to really researching and digging in classrooms, in research, what are the things that you're really still wondering about?
It is a question that Bob and I have been discussing since we finished Forged by Reading, which is, that's our newest one. It came out in December. And so we've had a little bit of time to breathe and to say what's next. And our greatest concern is that we now live in a nation that is so polarized that finding common ground on almost any topic is extremely difficult. And we live in a nation in which many people have confused what science and facts tell us with what they believe. So I really can't have a conversation with someone who starts the conversation by saying, I just don't believe in climate change, because 98%, maybe it's even up to 99% of all scientists who deal with climate say that kind of statement, I don't believe, is something you have no way of discussing, because it's not about belief. It's about it is. If someone wants to tell me I don't believe in gravity, well, best of luck in proving that when you step off a building.
Right.
So what Bob and I want to do next, so I guess we've gone beyond thinking about it to maybe now planning it, is we want to work beyond the classroom. And we want to write a book that talks to the public about what it means to change your mind. what it means to be tentative. We think that one of the most important attributes of a person is a little bit of tentativeness. And that doesn't mean being afraid. It means you'll go into a conversation open to hearing another perspective. So if you've ever had a fight, an argument with someone who means a lot to you, but they start it with, I am right and you are wrong, that conversation's it's not a conversation. It's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
And there's too much going on from the highest levels of government to the two people standing together in a grocery store of, I am right and you are wrong. So we want to write, our next book will be a book it'll still be about thinking about education and becoming a more literate society, but it will be about how do we help all of us be willing to say, let me rethink that. And let me understand that from your perspective, or let me just kind of mull over these facts you shared with me. We're a nation that lives either on Fox News or CNN. And Fox News people say, no, of course I'm not going to watch CNN. And CNN people say, of course I'm not going to watch Fox. Right. And both of those stations were created to present a particular viewpoint.
Right.
And couldn't we all learn more if we listened to that other viewpoint? So that's what we're exploring. How do we help America change its mind? And it's exciting.
It sounds like a fantastic book. And I think it's so timely, not only for all the reasons you described, but also we've just lived through a year where families were much more engaged, or I don't know what the exact term was, in the educating of their children at all levels. And so I think that people are really engaged in conversations about, they feel much more empowered than usually following the typical pattern of like, I do have choice. We live, especially in Texas, lots of choice. And what are all of my choices? And really looking at, do I want to go into something that's comfortable and familiar, something that looks like what I've been doing? And so I think that for that reason, that is such a great book and such a great concept to explore. And I also think, I think part of that will be the analysis of who benefits. You know, when you have polarizing, I think the television programs is a great example. There's a purpose and an intent, and what is that purpose and intent? And I think American people, I think that people in general, we're much smarter than we give credit for. And once that curtain is kind of pulled back and it's like, oh, okay, there's a reason behind this. And then you then become the critical consumer and more likely to want to sample all the things. So that's exciting.
It is exciting. But, you know, pulling back that curtain means sometimes people are going to have to be willing to examine their own biases. There is a bill in the state of Louisiana right now. I think it's passed the Senate, but not gone into effect yet. And I think there's still some stops along the way that might change it. But the bill basically says that in Louisiana, they will no longer allow curriculum that discusses divisive moments. Now, I don't even know. First off, I mean, I was listening.
What are you going to discuss?
Right. And I was listening to this, and I was listening to someone be interviewed about it on national television. And the question I wanted the commentator to ask is, who's deciding what's divisive? Because this came out of the schools everywhere wanting to discuss what the George Floyd decision means and why it was so important, and how one man came to bring light to so much that needs to be discussed. So who's decided what's divisive? Well, a white person. It's white educators. It's white, not educators. I would like to change that. It's white policymakers. It's white parents who are afraid of conversations that might be so tough that they have to examine their own beliefs and biases.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot, but I think Bob and I will be writing on this one for a while because there's a lot to discuss.
Absolutely. And I think that I wanted to say initially, we all have such a desire for peace and calm, but I really think that's from a place of white privilege and power. But because somebody who hasn't been empowered and is being suppressed, they know that change will only come from lots of hard conversations, conflict, and working through that. But I think as a people, I want to believe that as humans, like we want to avoid conflict. It doesn't feel good. But what we haven't experienced is healthy. I think of it as a bridge. We all know in marriages and friendships and all, there are tough conversations and tough times, but it's by going over that bridge and getting to the other side, not with sunshine and roses, working through it. It takes you to a whole new place. But so often we stand on that other side of the bridge, like we see the three billy goats gruff, and we just do not want to go over that bridge. We've avoided it for so long, and we're so scared and uncomfortable of what's going to happen as we cross over that.
But that we that you're discussing is white people.
White people, yes.
White people. Right. Because, someone said to me one time, a couple of years ago, Kylene, you're the least racist person I know. And I said, yes, but am I the most anti-racist person you know? And those are extremely different.
Right.
And in moving from becoming the least racist to the most anti-racist, I have to not only be willing to walk over that bridge, like you were talking about with the three billy goats, but I have to be willing to turn around and say, why the hell aren't the rest of you coming with me?
Right.
And then I have to say, what is it a bridge to? What am I getting over to? Am I just getting to still a white centered world? What am I doing? And I don't want to be the least racist. I want to be the most anti-racist. And that's my journey right now. And I think I've got a long way to go, but it sure is exciting to be getting there.
Yes, it is. I want to thank you today for your time, and thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty. And I know that anyone who's watching right now has connections and questions and what abouts and all that. And I think that's the very best part of an interview. And I want to remind the viewers to please subscribe. There's a button to subscribe, and to also please consider sharing this interview on your social media accounts. Many times when we share out, people will like or comment, but I would love it if people would retweet or write their own post, because then that widens the audience so everyone can see these really phenomenal interviews. And I want to thank you guys, the viewers, for your time, and I hope that you have a great day. Hey, thanks for listening to this interview. I hope you found value in the conversation, made a connection with your own life, and had an aha moment or two.